My name is John Collins. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks so much, Courtney, for asking me to come here and speak and give me the opportunity to tell this old tale of hopeless dereliction and recovery. I hate that you said that about meditation. I don't meditate anymore. I changed my mind about that. I think it's I will talk down on it. I will tell you why it's not to be. I'm just kidding. Anyway. Courtney did. She wrote me and said, "Would you come speak on such and such a date?" I said, "Absolutely. No problem. I'll be there." And then she wrote me back. I don't know. It was either the next day or later that day. I'm assuming you are still sober and have a sponsor and so will my sponsor please raise his hand? I brought him down here. I brought Jim down here. He's been my sponsor for about 24 years now, and So anyway, and I have a sponsor. And I have a home group, the South Point group in Durham. Been a member there for a long time. We meet on Tuesday nights, and we have a step discussion on 3 weeks of the month. We have a tradition discussion on the 4th Tuesday, and when there's a 5th Tuesday like this one, we have a potluck and an hour-long speaker. So anybody who wants to make a little road trip up there and hear a talk and enjoy some food and fellowship, please join us. Love to have you. It's a very welcoming group. I'm honored to be a member of that group, and it is a Three Legacy group like this one, which I think it's extremely important to participate in all three legacies that I'm selling myself short if I'm not, putting myself out there in unity, service, and recovery. And my sobriety date is September the 9th, 1996. And it was not my idea to get sober that day. I'll get to that. And I'm a recovered alcoholic. And when I say I'm an alcoholic, what that means to me is that I cannot reliably predict how much I'm going to drink or what I'm going to do once I start drinking. That when I drink alcohol, I trigger the phenomenon of craving, as described in our book. And I can't stop. I just, it got worse and worse. Early on, I just thought I was changing my mind and making bad decisions and poor decisions and hanging out with the wrong people. But, looking back from a very early age, I can tell that I was powerless. I have this disease. Also, I introduced myself as John Collins, alcoholic. I say my first and last name. There's no anonymity under the tent. And if I get locked up, I want you guys to be able to send me a big book or come visit me or send me some money, maybe. And you got to have my last name to be able to do that. If I go to the hospital, I get to visit men in jail, not just prisons but jail. Tonight, I would have brought a bigger crowd, but some of the guys are in the prison tonight. This is the night I usually get to go to the Orange Correctional Center in Hillsborough, and we do a book study in there, and we take our time. And the point of that meeting is to go through the book and take the actions, so that men in there can be changed before getting out and have a chance to live life on life's terms. But I say my first and last name because Dr. Bob said, number one, he said everybody in the group needs to know each other's first and last name, and we can violate the 11th tradition by being anonymous below the level of press, radio, and film. That that we don't get sober to come in here and hide. This is not Paranoids Anonymous. They folded because nobody could find out where the meeting was. It was a good thing for a little while. But I'll get into my story. You want me to tell your story? I was born a little bitty baby. And I came out lying and crying from the very get-go. I was born January 1st, and my mother was drinking and partying the night, and so I was drunk and looking for a party when I came out of the chute. And I tried to keep going. I tried to keep the party going. I did everything I could. From a very early age, I just loved alcohol. My early memories of alcohol are being around my dad and his brothers. He was one of 6 boys that grew up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I grew up in Charlotte most of my life, and we were back and forth. Both sets of grandparents were down there. And if I was at the beach, it was a good time because I wasn't in school. You know, it was either summer or a holiday, and I did pretty good in school up until about halfway through the first grade. And at that point, the expectations went up, and my willingness to put forth the effort went down because I really just wanted to have a good time. And I don't remember my first drink. My dad would give me sips of beer, and I would take them. And I don't think I liked it at first, but I learned to like it pretty good shortly thereafter. And I remember being at the beach and around my dad and his brothers and their business partners, and at our oyster roast down in Murrells Inlet, and just the best of times, and alcohol was that, joyful camaraderie and just fun and good times, worry-free, because I wasn't in school. Like I say, I didn't want to be in school. I knew there was some value there, but I had a issue with delayed gratification, and I still do, but I'm able to resist it sometimes these days, and will put forth some effort and reap some benefits of delayed gratification. But at that time, I had zero, and I just always wanted to have a good time, and I was always missing out on something. And so that was a joyful memory of alcohol early on. And then I remember my parents fighting. Dad would have been golfing, hunting, fishing, or coming home, and my mom didn't like it, and they'd get into a fight, and there'd be furniture breaking, and I'd be cowering in the corner, afraid and saying this is crazy. And the police came to the house twice when I was a kid, either in preschool in Charlotte, and then Dad went to grad school in Tennessee, and I remember in kindergarten or first grade there, the police come to the house. So and Dad drank himself out of UNC and went to the Army. That's what they did with you back then, send you to the Army instead of treatment. They didn't have treatment, I guess. And so there's a lot of alcoholism. My grandmother in the family, my dad, some uncles, so my parents were fighting a lot, and eventually separated, and at a very early age, in like 3rd and 4th grade. And at that time, and I was always just willing to do a dare. I wanted to stand out. I would cut up in class to make people laugh. I would shoot the teacher with a paper clip. I was just a bad kid. And I thrived on that. I wanted to be the dude on the motorcycle in the Bad News Bears, if anybody remembers that thing. I just want, and I had what's called feigned indifference. I wanted to act. I cared so much about what people thought about me, but I just wanted you to think I didn't care. And I acted out like that too. And I would do all kind of crazy stuff. I smoked pot in the 3rd grade. I was with my older brother, and we were drinking beer and going to a football game with my older brother's friends' older brothers, and the older guys pulled out some marijuana, and my brother looked scared, and I said, "Give it here," and that set a pattern of me just doing anything, and I loved cutting up. From an early age, I wanted to get away with as much as I could, and I watched movies. I remember watching Paper Moon and watching them con people, and just thought that was so slick. And I remember my dad and his uncles telling stories about, basically, they were just laughing, talking about antics they did as kids, and I'm listening to it. And it was actually theft and vandalism, but it just sounded fun and slick, and I just started pushing the envelope. I don't know how I got the bad reputation in elementary school, but my 4th, 5th, and 6th grade girlfriend, I had an alias with her parents. I was Chris Johnson. They had heard of John Collins, but they didn't know what I looked like. They just knew I was bad news, but they thought Chris Johnson was a pretty nice young man, And I would come out, it was nuts. But I remember early days climbing out the window in the 5th grade to go over to the teacher would go on break, and I would climb out the window and go over to the middle school and hang out in the woods with the guys who were drinking beer, smoking cigarettes, and that's just where I wanted to be. I always wanted to be somewhere else and wanted to be freer. I wanted to have more privileges and more freedom and more autonomy. I didn't want to work for it, but I thought that all that life was about drinking, having a good time, and that people who didn't do that just didn't get the meaning of life. And so I devised ways to get more alcohol very early on. I would go to a golf tournament and walk up to the concessionaire. I'd buy a drink at one, and I'd walk over to another, and they'd be really busy, and I'd stand there. I was just a little kid, and I would stand there, and they'd say, "Can I help you?" And I'd say, "I gave you a $20 bill for my drink. I would get my change." And they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, just give me the money." I'm like, "Wow, this is pretty slick." And I'd go to the next one and do it. Next thing you know, I got a pocket full of money, and I'm getting somebody to get me some liquor at the liquor store, and hanging out with my friends. And when I wasn't doing that, I remember in the winter, I loved it because I had a puffy coat on, and I'd go to Harris Teeter and go and get a bottle of Tickle Pink Boone's Farm and stick it down this sleeve, and Strawberry Hill and stick it down this sleeve, and a carton of Marlboro Reds down the middle, and zip up and walk right out of the store, acting like it was okay, and go in the woods, and just good memories. I'd go to my girlfriend's. There was a barn not far from the house where my girlfriend and cousins kept their ponies, and we'd go over there and just hang out and party. I remember, the unmanageability and the powerlessness in my life. I can see clearly today, even back then. I remember one point I was supposed to be home to go take family photos, church family photos. And my dad said, "Be home at a certain time." And this might have been 4th grade, and my parents were still together. They were just getting ready to split up. And I remember I was partying at the barn with my friends, and I knew I was going to get in trouble, but the certainty of getting in trouble was not enough to override the fun I was having and the next drink. And I would always, and later on it was like, well, I got school tomorrow, but I can hang out till 11 o'clock. But I'm going home and I'm going to bed, and I'll get up and go to school. But 11 o'clock comes and I'm having a good time. There's more alcohol available, and I would keep drinking. And the next thing you know, it's midnight. Next thing you know, it's 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I stay out all night, whatever. And I thought I was making bad choices and changing my mind. But, in all honesty, to thine own self be true, I know without a shadow of doubt that I could not choose anything else, even at that time. Not predictably. Once in a while, I would slow down or stop at the right time, and that would give me the gambler's fallacy that it would be okay, and I would do it again, because there were plenty of times that I swore off forever, with and without a solemn oath, whatever. And mainly I was swearing off of the problems. I wanted the consequences of my drinking to stop, and I wanted to figure that out. I knew I was not a real alcoholic. The real alcoholics were the people who were homeless, barefoot, down in Charlotte, living on the streets, drinking out of a paper bag, and I was just a kid. My parents split up, and I started manipulating my dad against my mom, and vice versa. And when I'd get in trouble with Dad, I'd go stay with Mom. When I'd get in trouble with Mom, I'd go stay with Dad. I wound up getting arrested for vandalism at the school, as well as stealing a bicycle. All I ever needed was transportation to get to the other side of town where something was going on, to a party. And I would steal bicycles, and I would steal motorcycles, dirt bikes. I taught myself how to hotwire the old cars without a steering lock on them very early on. It was simple, and I thought I was a genius. But I knew where these old cars were, and I'd find cars with keys in them all the time too, and just take off, And it was scary at first, but it became commonplace for me. I'd steal the same one next week sometimes, and park them back in the driveway, and sometimes wreck them. And So I wound up getting arrested, and my mom wanted me to go to. She took me to a counselor and a therapist, and my parents had split up at this point, and my mom wanted me to go to a therapeutic school down in Georgia, and my dad didn't want to pay for it, and I didn't want to go. It was like a 2-year program. I had gone down there. It did not look fun, and so I preferred at that time to take 6 months in training school. And I did. I went to Swannanoa juvenile detention up in the mountains, and we went hiking and backpacking. And while I was there, I had lost, the ability to control my alcohol intake at that time as a 13-year-old. And I went and we went hiking in the mountains, and I had FOMO the whole time I was there. I had fear of missing out. All my friends were back in Charlotte having a good time, and poor me, I'm up here doing this. And when I got back to Charlotte, I started hanging out with the same people and doing the same things. And at 13 years old, we were running away from home, and me, Scott, and Shelton stole Shelton's dad's Trans Am 400, and I drove it to Daytona Beach, Florida, and we were leaving and gone for good. I took school books with me, even though I didn't want to study. I don't know. I thought, education. I need education. Maybe I'll look at these while I'm down here. But and we went down there like it was okay, driving up and down the beach, and got people to buy us beer, and rented a hotel room. At 13 years old, and I don't know if I could see over the. I thought we looked okay. I might have been sitting on the book, but we didn't have MapQuest or GPS back then. We mapped our route in the middle school library, for a librarian here, and on the atlas. And too many people knew about it, and so when Shelton's dad found his car gone the next morning, it didn't take him long to sleuth and figure out where we had gone, and he chartered a flight down there and went and found his car and staked it out and brought us back. Shelton got sent to military academy. Scott, I don't know what happened to him. I basically I moved in with my dad and started living with him. I was living with my dad in Myrtle Beach, going to Myrtle Beach High School, and he got sick. And he was diagnosed with cancer when I was 14. And for about a year, he was seeking treatment and traveling. And I was just a 14 and then 15-year-old, checked out, living at a place at the beach with my brother, and just partying the whole time. And I missed more school. I did not pass the 9th grade that year, and then my father passed away, and I was 15, and they came to move me out of that house, and I ran away and went and got a job at a t-shirt place on the beach, and rented a room in a extremely sketchy office building converted into a rooming house, and saw all kinds of horrific drug use and low bottom stuff going on, and I was selling pipes and bongs and t-shirts at this place, and I started hitchhiking back and forth from Charlotte, trying to sell drugs to support myself, and wound up getting ripped off, and went back to Charlotte, got arrested for truancy, and talked my mom into sending me to a boarding school. It's one that I wanted to go to. It was one that I knew that it's where everybody went when they got kicked out of all the other schools. Everybody there partied like I did. And it was like Fast Times at Ridgemont High on steroids. We had ashtrays on our desks, and it was a wild time. I got kicked out of there for having a wild PJ party with this guy named Devo, who was the first punk rocker I had ever seen. He had the mohawk and the leathers. He was from Manhattan, and we became fast friends, and we got kicked out together, and then we just took off. We weren't waiting for our parents, and we left, and I tried to steal a tractor trailer that had the key in it, but I didn't know how to work the gears, so we left that, probably burned up the clutch, and went down to Statesville and found a van at a garden center with the keys in it, and stole it, and went to some friend's house, and then we left the van in the woods near their house, and they exploded it. And then when the police came, they told them our names. And then, so I was 16 at this time and got arrested for grand theft auto, and agreed to go to treatment. And I went to Hazelden Pioneer House up in Minnesota, and got to, I got introduced. I had been to some AA meetings periodically. The counselors that I had been to recommended some meetings. I don't remember how many or what, but around 14 years old, I was introduced, but I was not a real alcoholic. I just, there's no way I could fit in with all the old people that I saw in there, and so all I needed to do was just get my stuff together, and a lot of people told me that. My uncle was just like, get your stuff together. You need to, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Stop drinking too much. And a friend of mine's mom would say, why don't you just get some beer and stay here at the house? And that sounded like a great idea. But once I drink a 12-pack, I want some more, and then I want some liquor, and then I want to go see what's going on. And it doesn't matter how to get there. I'm going to find a way to get there and to keep the thing going. And so I got put on probation with 3-year suspended sentence at 16, and went to treatment. And I went to Hazelden learned a lot about the disease and all, but I still wasn't a real alcoholic, and I missed my friends back in Charlotte, and I went to a halfway house, and then I went to a state convention up there, which was I remember getting goosebumps even back then, in saying the Lord's Prayer with a huge room of recovered alcoholics, and I got motivated. I felt, y'all said some really smart stuff, and I thought it was good, but I just like what you were saying. I didn't know anything about taking the actions that are outlined in the book, and I didn't have the willingness to do that. So, and I wasn't a real alcoholic, so why should I? So shortly thereafter, I just went on back to Charlotte and said, "The heck with it, I'll face the consequences." But I didn't. They continued the probation, and I was supposed to go to school, and I tried to go to school, and I enrolled at. I went to UCLA, which is University of Charlotte, Elizabeth Avenue, otherwise known as Central Piedmont Community College, and in the high school diplomacy program, but I enrolled there, but I attended the Double Door Inn across the street, which opened up really early, selling sandwiches and beer, and I remember going over there, and I remember distinctly friends saying, "Creshons are having a party at the lake," and I said, "Well, I'll just go to school tomorrow." I mean, any opportunity, I can resist anything but temptation, and so I left and went and started partying. But once I start partying, there's no telling when I'm going to stop. And so a week later or so, I tell myself, well, I'll just sell my books back to the bookstore, and I'll do it next semester. I'll just punting that responsibility down the road and keep partying and get a little job, and got a job at restaurants or construction sites, but I couldn't keep those jobs because I always. There was always an opportunity. Either I would stay up when I was working construction, there'd be a party at night before, and I couldn't get to bed on time to get up in the morning and go form concrete, or working in restaurants, even when I'm supposed to be at work at 4 in the afternoon, because there'd be an after party after work, and once I start partying, I just want to keep going. And I loved quitting jobs. I loved quitting jobs after I had worked a partial week, and I had a check coming for like $42.70. It felt like freedom, that I could have a good time. And so I wound up violating that probation and getting sentenced to 3 years in prison. And I went to the old Polk Youth Center downtown, down in Raleigh, and I did not belong there. I thought, this is crazy, I don't belong here. And I saw a guy escaping and getting shot. He was over the first fence and up on the second one and shot, and he was just dangling, and they kept shooting and shooting. And we were on the deck in the recreation yard, and I was scared to death. But soon after that, I got transferred down to Cameron Morrison, not far from here, and wound up getting my GED there. And just took the tests and passed somehow. And I don't remember the AA meetings at that point. I wasn't really interested, but I just missed my friends, and I was reading mindless novels. I learned to gamble. I learned to loan money. I learned to adapt to the system and to survive there. And loaning money, selling weed, smoking a little pot, drinking a little hooch. Anything to fast forward through the time, anything to make the time go faster. And I told myself, when I get out, I'm going to do things differently. There's no way. It did not make sense. This is an irrational disease. There's no way I'm going to lose control over drinking again. I'm going to drink like a gentleman. I'm going to drink and go to bed on time. I'm going to fulfill my responsibilities, because this is ridiculous that I wound up in this situation. And once I got out, I had been saving up money, and you would think that I was just doing what the book talks about, saving up for the next bench. And I got out, and I went to see my old friends, and I started partying. And it was like an empirical experiment. When I got out, I started doing the same thing I had done every other time I had gotten out of treatment or jail or anything. That no matter how bad I wished to do different, no matter how much I swore to do different, no matter how much the conditions were ideal, the right job, money, house, girlfriend even, had all the things that I need, and I would tear it down. And so I continued to get in more and more trouble, and I I violated the probation, the parole on that 3-year sentence, and went back and went to the mountains. I remember going to meetings this time. I went to meetings up in Avery County, and there were some good volunteers. We're blessed in North Carolina to have some really good volunteers in the Department of Corrections, thanks to Tom I. I think founder of this group, who was a real hero of mine, and idol. Not really. Not idol. I'm not going to idolize anybody. Got a higher power. So again, I swore I was going to do things differently, and I had a good plan to do things differently when I got out. And when I got out, again, it was like an empirical experiment. Putting baking soda in vinegar, I fizzed. No matter how bad I wanted not to fizz, I just fizzed. I could not, once reintroduced into the free society. When the state was managing my life, I was pretty manageable, and I was lulled into complacency of thinking things were okay, because I was working out and just making the time go, and I didn't have access to enough alcohol. I would drink, some, but there wasn't enough to really drink like I wanted to drink. And I got out and went back to Charlotte and started seeing my old friends. Oh, I violated that 90-day parole by getting new charges and getting a new probation sentence with 5 years suspended. And it was for theft, drugs, selling drugs, stolen goods, anything I could do to just make money to keep. I couldn't work, and so I would just do whatever there was to try to keep the party going. So when I got out, I was already on probation this time, and I wound up doing the same thing over. I fizzed again and got in more and more trouble and violated that 5 years and got. I went in on that, got out on parole, violated that, got out again, and then in '87 I got arrested by the feds and wound up getting sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, and went to Atlanta Penitentiary, which was like the most deadly penitentiary in the world, and it was a very scary place. I remember watching The Silence of the Lambs and that, and they had this movie theater upstairs. It was these old dreary curtains hanging down the sides, and watched The Silence of the Lambs, and I was like really scared. But I learned to adapt, and I was gambling and all this. I won a bunch of money, and some people told on me, said that I was trying to escape from Atlanta Penitentiary because I had a locker full of cigarettes that I had been gambling and got me gone because my window was broken. But and it was like the old Alcatraz with the tiers of bars and people just screaming in the old Charlie house, and then I got sent out to Big Spring, Texas, where it was an old Air Force base, and we were drinking wine made out of oranges. It was like drinking screwdrivers by the tennis court, playing tennis, and eating good food. And the food is better in federal prison. So if you're going to get in trouble, my retirement plan, if it doesn't work out, is just to rob a bank, because I'll either have some money or I'll go to federal prison. They take care of the old guys and they feed you pretty good. Just kidding. So I went out to Texas and then came up to Petersburg, Virginia. Oh yeah, while I was at El Reno, Oklahoma, where Timothy McVeigh was, I won the 8-ball tournament against Gotti's nephew, and I thought that's one of my claims to fame. But and then I went up to Petersburg, Virginia, and played ping pong with Mayor Marion Barry of D.C. And I got out from there. Right, I finished that and got released on parole from Petersburg, Virginia, federal prison camp, and went to the bus station. They dropped me off. And I got a long neck beer. I thought it was time to celebrate. And I started drinking. And again, I went to see what my old friends were doing. And they were doing the same thing they were doing before. And I started doing the same thing and started drinking. And I couldn't stop. And I had been on federal work release. I skipped over that. But I had I had a sports car that I had gotten arrested for drinking and driving while on federal work release in. And I needed to go back to Charlotte and sell that car. And because I was going to do things differently this time, I had a work plan to start a business at Myrtle Beach, and I got to get sober here. So anyway, I violated again, went back to federal prison for the second time, and when I got out, finally, December 1995. It was the first time in my adult life I'd been out of prison, off probation, off parole, and that seemed like a cause for celebration. And I went to see my old friends, and I started partying, and went to sell that car, and was going to go to the beach because my grandmother needed someone to stay there, and I got that money in my pocket, and I started partying, and it triggered that allergy, and I could not stop, and I partied, and I finally, that was more pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization than I had ever imagined. At one point I said, I'm not a real alcoholic, I'm not this and that, but for 9 months I was bouncing in and out of jail and in and out of crappy hotels and stealing the blankets out of the hotels when I couldn't pay it and going sleeping in the woods because it was cold and I had nowhere to go. And I was going in and out of jail, and I remember being in the jail and them telling me it's time to go, we're letting you out, and I would say, no, you give me a bag of bologna sandwiches and I'll leave. And I refused to leave the jail until they gave me some food. And they took everybody else, and I said no. They finally gave me some bologna sandwiches and put me out, And so I remember, September the 9th, 1996, I was finally arrested for the last time. And at that point, I had become basically a hopeless, homeless, barefoot, shirtless, derelict, thieving, and finally a habitual felon alcoholic on the streets of Charlotte, looking for something else to steal to keep the party going. But I was charged with 5 counts of habitual felon, and that meant that the state of North Carolina was through with me forever 5 times. And that was September the 9th, 1996. And like I say, I was just trying to keep the party going. But I got arrested, and I was put in the jail, and I was suicidal, and I wanted to kill myself. And I started thinking about AA and started reading the stories in the big book. I would smuggle the big book. I would fight the guards, I would fight the inmates, and I would go to the hole and I would smuggle a big book in there. They didn't even want you to have a big book. You could only have religious material, and they would take the big book from me, and I would, always try to keep one. And finally, I was sentenced to 120 to 153 months in state prison. And after spending a year in jail and being depressed and eating all the junk food I could, and I went to Central Prison in Raleigh and in processing and was going through the dining hall line, and the guy in front of me got a plate with salad, fruit, vegetables, and I got some kind of slimy noodles with an unidentifiable homogenized goop on it. And I asked the guy, what kind of diet are you on? He said, for religious reasons, I get a vegetarian diet. And so I became a Buddhist that day and decided to exert my right, my constitutionally protected right to my religion, and started, my brother was an attorney, and I got the policy manual from him, and I started studying vegetarianism, and I started working step 14 really early. I wanted to be healthy, I was working out and quit smoking. I had stopped smoking. I had smoked up to that time, but I was able to stop alcohol and cigarettes at the same time. My dad died of lung cancer, but in prison, I started getting involved in education too. I had some opportunities just present themselves. God tricks me, like with that diet. I was trying to fight the system about my religious diet, and then I thought, because they wouldn't feed me what they were supposed to sometimes, and I knew what they were supposed to do. They didn't give me enough food a lot of times, and I would borrow the pot dealer scale and weigh the food and mail it to Raleigh, to the dietitian in Raleigh, and they would say, yeah, you're right, and this and that. So I got a big head about that. I fancied myself a little bit of a jailhouse lawyer, and so I started writing away for ammunition to bolster my right to this diet. And what I got was information about the 11th step. I had never prayed. I prayed, when the police were behind me, and when I was running from the cops. There were multiple times when I've, jumped out of a second story window and run into the woods and buried myself, took off the tie-dye t-shirt, laid it under me and buried myself in leaves and promptly passed out. The police found me about an hour later, thought they had a body, and that's happened more than once with me. Absolutely crazy stuff. But yeah, so and nobody drives off a cliff and says, "Oh, Big Bang Theory," but I did finally start a meditation practice in prison I started writing away for this ammunition, and what I got was information on prayer and meditation, and I started Meanwhile, I was trying to get in all the education I could, and I was transferring to different prisons in the North Carolina Department of Corrections, seeking educational opportunities, and taking classes by correspondence, as well as going to all the AA meetings that I could. And it seemed like everywhere I tried to go to take an educational class, there just was better AA everywhere I went. When I went to Nash, there was Paige Wood, and he was a fantastic volunteer. And then I went to Brown Creek, and there was a bunch of other guys. And then when I got to Orange Correctional Center, there was Jim, and 20 other people streaming in the gate. But meanwhile, I was studying, and Courtney mentioned meditation. I think I had no idea what it was, and some of the the books that I was getting to fight the system describe meditation, and I started a meditation practice, and it's very simple. That I would sit quietly on my bed and focus my attention on the tip of my nose and just bring my thought to this consciously and feel the sensation of the cool air and think, breathing in, 1. Breathing in, 2. Breathing in. What are we eating after this? And so my mind will drift, right? And every time it drifts, and my goal is to count to 10. Just count 10 breaths. My mind is going to drift. Everybody I talk to about meditation, my sponsees, they'll say, I can't meditate. My mind jumps around. That's the point. If there were no gravity, we wouldn't get any benefit of lifting weights. The meditation is the practice of strengthening ourselves. Every time my mind drifts and I bring it back, it's like doing a dumbbell curl for the mind to choose what I'm thinking about. Every time I bring it back. So it's a blessing when my mind drifts away, and it's going to drift away. And of the 20 minutes that I'm sitting, that I set my watch. I do 10 minutes every night right now. I did 20 every night in prison for a long time. And I set my watch, and I just sit up, and I don't lean back. I don't go to sleep. Sometimes I nod off, but I just go back to the breath. And if I have an itch, I choose to notice the itch and not scratch it if I can, and go back to the breath. And I think that parlays into not picking up a drink. When I have that itch, it parlays into not telling somebody to go screw themselves, or any kind of catastrophic thing that I could do as a compulsive person. And I think I owe my life and my recovery to that practice, which is in our book. That thank God I didn't do much praying, like I say, unless the cops were behind me. And so I kept studying, and I wound up getting an engineering degree while in prison, and transferring to Orange Correctional Center. And there was a huge contingent of volunteers. I went there to go to study release to further my education at the University of North Carolina. But what I did was met a lot of good volunteers, and one of them introduced me to the president of an engineering firm, and I wound up getting a job on work release at a local engineering firm, so I worked on work release for a few years there, and I'm still employed there today. I'm a civil engineering project manager. I've been there 21 years next month, and you cannot get here from where I came. There's no way. I've got the largest financial institution in the state. All the executives, they call me their civil engineer. It's unbelievable. I mean, that they trust me. And I enjoy my work. I love it. And I go to it. Now, my sponsor might differ a little bit. I don't enjoy everything about it. There's a lot of red tape and stuff that I get to talk to him every Monday when we meet together. I get to share, my struggles. And he's a retired engineer, and he gets to, he's got that experience as well as the recovery. And I get to hear a different perspective about how, and this whole program is about me changing my perspective and viewing things from a different way, and getting me out of the way and allowing God to work through these actions and the spiritual program of action of helping others. And I was able to these days, so I got out August 16th, 2006. And when I got out that day, there was a large church group, a lot of people. I had built a community of people and who welcomed me out. And I made sure I went to a meeting that night. And I joined the South Point group, while in prison. Jim used to pick me up and take me to the South Point group, and we go fellowship before the meeting. Today I get to do the same thing with other guys. I would be there tonight, and I get to take guys out on Tuesday nights. The North Carolina Department of Corrections has actually given me, thanks to Tom a staff ID card for the North Carolina Department of Corrections that allows me to go in any prison in the state to carry the message of recovery, and I enjoy doing that. I got to go recently to an anniversary meeting at Wake and speak to the men there, and I also, I didn't get sober. We don't get sober to hide out in AA and just do AA. I get involved in the community. I get to use my deep, dark past as my greatest asset. And I've had the honor and pleasure and privilege of serving on numerous nonprofit boards that aid people getting out of prison. And I get to bring to those experience of recovery, because there's a lot of church people who don't know, about recovery and what alcoholism is. And I get to help, and the first few times I went to treatment or jail, prison, when I got out, I was going to sweep it all under the rug and forget about it. But, our book is very clear that is a big mistake, that my deep, dark past is my greatest asset. Not just an asset, it's my greatest asset, because in the hands of God, it can avoid misery and death for others. And life is awesome. There's nothing I can't do except drink. I'm like a peanut allergic person. And I'm not obsessing. I don't have that mental obsession of thinking I can eat peanuts, It's that simple. And to get there, all I had to do was quit thinking I had to figure everything out. Thinking that I had to understand. I thought I had to define a higher power at step 2 and 3, which is insane. It's like all I need to do is follow the recipe. If somebody's got a great cake recipe, all I got to do is follow it, right? Chocolate cake. Follow the steps of the recipe. Whether I believe I'm going to get a cake or not, whether I even think I want a cake. But I was beaten into a state of reasonableness where I'm like, okay, I think I need a cake. I need to follow these instructions. And, for a long time I'd get to step 2 and 3 and think I needed to find God. But that's like following the recipe to bake a cake and thinking that before I can follow that, I need to understand the chemical reactions that go on in that cake. And I need to understand how the oven heats and is it a gas oven or is it electric oven? And if it's electric, is it hydroelectric? Is it nuclear? Is it coal-fired? And how does that work? And how does it get transmitted? And that's the kind of red herrings that I, got into, thinking I needed to find God and understand God before I make use of it and just take the simple actions that are outlined in this program and let go of what I think. I've got a thinking problem. I need to not try to think my way out of it. I need to act my way out of it. I mean, the cake doesn't even look like a cake. It looks like a bowl of crap up until the last step. You put it in the oven, finally, it looks like a bowl of crap. And recovery might look like that early on. I'm a firm believer that a pink cloud never has to go away. A pink cloud it's contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual action. It's contingent on the maintenance of me keeping doing the things that got me on the pink cloud to start with. That I am a recovered alcoholic, and I'm of the hopeless variety. That this miraculous, absolutely amazing life that I have now, stark raving sober, loving life, having a great time, dealing with life on life's terms. But I have a daily reprieve, contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. Reprieve is the same word that the governor uses when he grants a death row prisoner clemency. And that's how serious it is for me. I'm dead and gone. I don't want to short sell myself. I want to stay here in the middle. Do not rest on your laurels. The book. It's easy to rest on my laurels, and I'm not going to do it. That I got to keep going. I got to make commitments. Commitments at the prison, commitments at my home group, commitment at other meetings, commitment to pick guys up at prison, as many sponsees as will allow me to work with them. And I never think I've got enough time, but God makes it work out. It's a synergistic relationship. The more I do this, the more time I have, the more energy I have, and the better life keeps getting. I started out, I talked about, my name is John Collins, I'm an alcoholic. I went to a meeting in Charlotte last year, and a guy came up to me after the meeting and said, are you the John Collins that stole my car in 1995? And I said, yes, I probably am. Tell me more about it. And yes, lo and behold, he was one of those last charges that I got, habitual felon for. And he's got 10 years sober. I mean, they left the keys in the car. It was their fault. But we're good friends now. He and his wife both got sober. She's the one who left the keys in the car, so he'll blame her too. And we're great friends. We went to a conference I was speaking at in Florida, and we all went together. He had a friend in the military right next to it, and we got to visit them, and we're fast friends. These folks tell me, when you're in Charlotte, if you need a place to stay, our home is yours. And that's just another miracle that just only happens in here, that we build these kinds of relationships. I don't want to miss this. I don't want to miss this. Life on life's terms. I lost my brother. He shot himself last year. He was a functioning alcoholic, and he could not get sober, and he had gone on so long. He was a successful attorney, 2 kids doing great, all kinds of material success and a thriving law practice, but his health was going down, and he wound up killing himself. And then my nephew had some events happen at school at State, and he had to go to the hospital in intensive care, and had fallen drunk and busted his head open, and had died and had to be revived. And we got him to treatment with an intervention, and he's 7 months sober now, and back in school now. And that family, they invited me to go to my sister-in-law's from Germany. They invited me to go to Germany with them next year. The good news is that my sober alcoholic self is not off-putting to even my young budding alcoholic nephew. And that says a lot for what you people have done for me. So that's about it. My time's up. But I'm very grateful. It's a pleasure to come here. Thank you so much for having me.